She had been married twice. Both husbands were dead. She was sent back to her father's house with a promise that was never kept. Years passed. The man who owed her a future forgot she existed. She had no court to appeal to, no advocate to speak for her, no power to force anyone to do the right thing. So she took off her widow's clothes. She covered her face with a veil, and she sat down on the road where her father-in-law would pass, disguised as a prostitute, betting her life on the conscience of a man who had already abandoned her once. Her name was Tamar, and what she did when the system failed her still echoes in the bloodline of kings. The blood on Joseph's coat was still fresh in Jacob's memory when Judah left. The text doesn't say why, doesn't mention guilt or shame or the weight of watching his father mourn a son who wasn't dead. It just says that Judah went down from his brothers and settled near a man named Hira in Adullam. Down, the word matters. In Scripture, going down usually means moving away from where you're supposed to be. Abram went down to Egypt during the famine. Jonah went down to Joppa to flee from God. And now Judah went down from his family, from the tents of Jacob, from the line of promise he was supposed to help carry. He left behind a father drowning in grief over a lie Judah had helped create. He left behind brothers who had all participated in selling Joseph, but now had to live with the silence. And he walked into Canaan, not as a stranger passing through, but as a man putting down roots. He made friends with Canaanites. He adopted their customs. He disappeared into a world that was never supposed to be his home. Whatever Judah was running from, he ran until he couldn't recognize himself anymore. In Adullam, Judah saw a woman. The text calls her the daughter of Shua, a Canaanite. It doesn't give her name. It doesn't describe a courtship or a negotiation with her family. It just says Judah saw her, took her, and married her. Abraham had sent his servant on a long journey to find a wife for Isaac from among his own people. The line of promise was supposed to stay distinct. Judah ignored all of it. He married into the very culture his family had been called to remain separate from. 3 sons came from this marriage: Onan, and Shelah. They were raised in Adullam, not in the tents of Jacob. They learned Canaanite customs, not the stories of Abraham and the God who had called him out of Ur. Judah built a family in a foreign land, and the foundation was already cracked before the first tragedy arrived. Whatever values he had carried from his father's house, he wasn't passing them on. He was building something rootless, and it would collapse soon enough. When Ar came of age, Judah found him a wife. Her name was Tamar. The text doesn't say where she came from or what her family was like, but it says Judah chose her, handpicked her for his firstborn son. She entered the household with everything a woman in that culture could hope for: a husband, a place in a family, the promise of children who would carry on the line. She wasn't just marrying a man. She was joining a system that was supposed to protect her, provide for her, and give her a future. What Tamar thought of Ah, we don't know. Whether she loved him, feared him, or simply accepted him as her duty, the text is silent. But she moved into his house, took his name, and waited for the life that was supposed to follow. She didn't know that her husband was wicked in the eyes of God. She didn't know that the family she had joined was already fracturing from the inside. She had stepped into a structure that looked solid from the outside. She would eventually have to burn it down just to survive. I was wicked in the sight of the Lord. The text doesn't say what he did, doesn't list his sins, doesn't describe his crimes. It just delivers the verdict and the sentence in the same breath. Judah's firstborn was wicked in the Lord's sight. So the Lord put him to death. Whatever A had done, it was severe enough for God to intervene directly. No illness, no accident, no enemy. God himself ended E's life. Tamar woke up a widow. However long the marriage had lasted, months, maybe a year, it was over. No children had come. In that culture, a childless widow wasn't just grieving. She was exposed. Her security, her identity, her future had all been tied to her husband and the sons she would bear him. Now she had neither. She was still young, still inside Judah's household, still technically part of the family. But the ground beneath her had just shifted. The first man who was supposed to protect her was dead, and she had no idea that the next two would fail her even worse. Tamar was given to Onan. That was how it worked. When a man died without children, his brother took the widow and gave her a son who would carry the dead man's name, inherit his property, continue his line. The system existed to protect women like her. A childless widow had no safety net, no income, no future. This law gave her one. Tamar didn't choose Onan. She didn't have to. The machinery of protection was functioning. She just had to trust that the next man in the system would do his duty. She moved from one brother's bed to another's. Whatever she felt, relief, resignation, grief still fresh. The text doesn't say, but she understood what was expected. A child would restore what Uz's death had stolen. A son would give her a place in the family, a claim to the inheritance, a reason to exist in a world that didn't have much use for barren widows. The system had caught her. All it needed now was for Onan to hold up his end. Onan understood the arrangement perfectly. He knew that any son born to Tamar would legally belong to his dead brother, would carry his name, inherit Uz's share, reduce Onan's own portion of the family wealth. He did the math, and he made his decision. He would take Tamar to bed, but make sure she never conceived. Every time he slept with her, he spilled his seed on the ground. The text is blunt about it. He used her and denied her for as long as the arrangement lasted. This wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a strategy. He treated Tamar like an object, something to be used when convenient and discarded when inconvenient. She lay beneath a man who was supposed to restore her future, and he was actively destroying it. She may not have known at first what he was doing, but eventually she would have realized. The months were passing, and her body remained empty. The system had given her to a man who was sabotaging her from the inside, and God was watching. God killed Onan too. The text says it plainly. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death also. 2 brothers, 2 deaths, the same woman in both beds. Tamar was a widow again. Twice over now, still childless, still without a future. But this time, something else followed her. Suspicion. In a world that looked for patterns and blamed the vulnerable, Tamar became a question mark. 2 sons dead. What was wrong with her? The whispers would have started in the household and spread outward. Was she cursed? Had she done something to bring this on? Superstition filled the gaps that grief left open. Tamar had done nothing wrong. Er's wickedness was his own. Onan's sabotage was his own. But she carried the weight of their deaths anyway. The system that was supposed to protect her had now made her a suspect. She was no longer just a widow. She was a liability. Judah had 1 son left. Shelah was young, too young for marriage, too young to fulfill the duty his brothers had failed. But he was next in line. The law was clear. When Shelah came of age, Tamar should be given to him. Judah said the right words. He told Tamar to return to her father's house and live as a widow until Shelah grew up. It sounded responsible. It sounded like a plan. It sounded like protection delayed, not protection denied. But Judah was lying. The text exposes his thoughts. For he thought, he may die too, just like his brothers. Judah wasn't protecting Tamar. He was protecting Shelah from her. He had already decided that this woman was dangerous, that proximity to her meant death, that the safest thing was to send her away and never bring her back. The promise he made was a promise he never intended to keep. Tamar walked out of Judah's house, believing she had a future. She didn't know she had just been abandoned. Judah never told Tamar what he was really thinking. He didn't say, "I'm afraid you'll kill my last son." He didn't admit that he blamed her for deaths she hadn't caused. He just sent her away with a lie dressed up as a delay. Wait for Shelah. It was easier than telling the truth. It was cleaner than admitting that he had already written her off. Judah chose his own comfort over her future, and he did it with a smile and a promise. This is what cowardice looks like when it wears the mask of responsibility. Judah positioned himself as the caring patriarch, managing a difficult situation, when in reality, he was a man too afraid to do the right thing. He couldn't face the possibility of losing another son. So he sacrificed his daughter-in-law instead, not with violence, but with silence. He pushed her out of sight and hoped she would fade away. He didn't realize that Tamar was paying attention, and she wasn't going to fade. Tamar went back to her father's house and waited. She put on widow's clothes, the visible sign of her status, the fabric reminder that she belonged to no one and had no future until someone gave her one. She couldn't marry another man. Legally, she was still bound to Judah's family, still promised to Shelah, still waiting for a wedding that existed only in words. She was trapped in a space between married and unmarried, between belonging and abandoned, between alive and erased. The months passed, then years. Shelah grew up. Tamar heard nothing. No messenger came from Judah's house. No wedding was arranged. The boy who was supposed to be her husband was now a man, and Judah had never sent for her. The promise had rotted in silence. Tamar sat in her father's house, wearing clothes that marked her as a woman in waiting, while the man who owed her a future pretended she didn't exist. The system hadn't just failed her, it had forgotten her. Time kept moving. Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, whose name the Bible never records, died. Judah mourned her, observed the proper period of grief, and then returned to normal life. He went up to Timnah with his friend Hira to oversee the shearing of his sheep. It was a season of work and celebration, when the wool was cut and the profits were counted. Judah was busy. Judah was moving on. Judah had other things to think about. And somewhere in her father's house, Tamar heard the news. Her father-in-law's wife was dead. His mourning was over. He was traveling to Timnah. And Shelah, the son she had been promised, was fully grown, but had never been given to her. The waiting was over, not because Judah had kept his word, but because Tamar finally understood that he never would. If justice was going to come, she would have to go get it herself. Tamar took off her widow's clothes. She covered her face with a veil, and she sat down at the entrance to Enaim, on the road to Timnah, directly in the path Judah would have to travel. The text is clear about her reasoning. She saw that, though Shelah had now grown up, she had not been given to him as his wife. This wasn't seduction for its own sake. This was a woman who had run out of options, using the only leverage she had left. She positioned herself where prostitutes positioned themselves. She dressed like someone selling what Judah had refused to give her through proper channels. It was a calculated risk. If Judah recognized her, she would be exposed. If he didn't take the bait, she would have gained nothing. If anything went wrong, she could be killed. But Tamar had been invisible for years. She had followed the rules, and the rules had abandoned her. Now she was done following. She was going to force the system to see her, one way or another. Judah saw her by the roadside and thought she was a cult prostitute. The veil hid her face. The location matched the expectation. He approached her without hesitation. "Come now, let me sleep with you," he said. The same man who had sent Tamar away with a promise, now negotiating for sex with a stranger. He offered a young goat as payment. She asked for something else, a pledge until the goat arrived. He agreed. She named her price. His seal, his cord, and his staff. These weren't random items. The seal was his signature, the stamp that authenticated documents and transactions. The cord held it around his neck, personal and distinctive. The staff was a symbol of his authority, his household, his identity. In today's terms, she asked for his passport, his credit card, and his family crest. Judah handed over everything that marked him as himself. They slept together. She conceived. And then she disappeared back into the widow's clothes and the father's house and the silence that Judah thought would last forever. Judah tried to retrieve his items. He sent his friend Hira with a goat to pay the prostitute and collect the pledge. But Hira couldn't find her. He asked the local men, "Where is the cult prostitute who was beside the road at Enim?" They told him there was no prostitute there. There never had been. Hira returned to Judah empty-handed. Judah decided to let it go. "Let her keep what she has," he said, "or we will become a laughingstock." He was more worried about his reputation than about the items that could identify him. He wanted the whole embarrassing episode to vanish. 3 months later, the news arrived. "Your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant." The messenger probably expected outrage. Judah delivered it instantly. Bring her out and have her burned to death. No investigation, no questions. No pause to consider the circumstances. The man who had just slept with someone he thought was a prostitute was ready to execute his daughter-in-law for the same act. The hypocrisy was total, and he had no idea what was coming. The crowd gathered. Tamar was brought forward. A woman accused of sexual immorality, pregnant with evidence, facing a death sentence from the patriarch of the family she had been promised to and abandoned by. Judah stood in the position of judge, the offended party, the head of household, the righteous man punishing sin. He had sold his brother into slavery. He had broken his promise to Tamar. He had slept with a stranger on the road to Timnah. And now he was ready to watch a woman burn for doing what he had done. This is what happens when power protects itself. Judah wasn't thinking about justice. He was thinking about reputation, about control, about eliminating a problem that had become visible. Tamar had been invisible when she was suffering in her father's house. Now that she was pregnant, now that she was inconvenient, she was suddenly worth noticing, worth punishing, worth killing. Judah didn't see his own sin standing in front of him. He only saw hers. Tamar didn't shout her defense. She didn't accuse Judah in front of the crowd, didn't humiliate him publicly, didn't scream about his hypocrisy for everyone to hear. Instead, she sent a messenger with 3 items and 1 question. The seal, the cord, the staff. "I am pregnant by the man who owns these. Examine them and see whose they are." She handed Judah his own identity and let him decide what to do with it. A strategy was precise. She gave him the evidence privately, through a messenger, before the execution. She gave him a chance to recognize his sin before she forced the issue. She gave him the opportunity to choose confession over murder. Tamar could have revealed everything in the open, shamed him in front of the community, destroyed his reputation in a single sentence. Instead, she trusted that somewhere inside the man who had abandoned her, there was still a conscience capable of telling the truth. Judah looked at the items, his seal, his cord, his staff. There was no mistaking them. No plausible explanation, no lie convincing enough to cover what they meant. He had 2 options. He could deny everything, claim the items were stolen, dismiss Tamar's evidence, proceed with the execution. She would die. The secret would die with her. His reputation would survive. Or he could tell the truth. Admit that the pregnant woman standing before him was carrying his child. Confess that the righteous judge had committed the very sin he was punishing. Destroy himself to save her. The crowd was watching. The fire was probably already prepared. Tamar's life hung on what Judah would say next. She had gambled everything on this moment. Years of waiting, a desperate disguise. Her body, her future, her life. All of it placed in the hands of a man who had already failed her twice. And now she had to stand there and see which version of Judah would show up. Judah recognized the items. And then he said the words that saved Tamar's life and broke his own image forever. "She is more righteous than I," since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah. Public confession, complete admission. No excuses, no deflection, no attempt to share the blame. Judah acknowledged that Tamar's desperate act was a response to his own injustice. He admitted that the woman he had condemned was more righteous than the man condemning her. The patriarch, who had ordered her death, now declared her innocence. The text adds a quiet detail, and he did not sleep with her again. This wasn't the beginning of a relationship. It was a collision of failures that produced something neither of them expected. Judah had wronged her, used her, abandoned her, and now, in front of everyone, he owned it. Something shifted in that moment. The man who had sold Joseph, who had lied to his daughter-in-law, who had slept with a stranger, and then tried to burn her, that man finally saw himself. And for the first time, he told the truth. Tamar gave birth to twins. During the delivery, one baby put out his hand, and the midwife tied a scarlet thread around the wrist to mark the firstborn. But the hand withdrew, and the other brother came out first. They named him Perez, breakthrough, because he had broken through. The second son, the one with the thread, was named Zerah. Two boys born from a scandal, from a roadside encounter, from a plan that should never have worked. Perez would become an ancestor of David, and David's line would lead, centuries later, to Jesus of Nazareth. When Matthew wrote his genealogy of Christ, he didn't sanitize the family tree. He named Tamar specifically. Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. God didn't work around this story. He worked through it. The Messiah came from a line that included a woman who dressed as a prostitute to claim what was hers from a man who had abandoned her. That's the kind of family tree God chose. That's the kind of brokenness he redeems. Tamar had no court, no lawyer, no power. She had a veil and the willingness to bet everything on a man who had already failed her. She didn't wait for justice. She built a trap where the only exit was the truth. What do you do when everyone who should protect you fails? You find what leverage you have, you make your plan, and you force the moment where even broken men have to choose between confession and murder. Subscribe. Some justice has to be taken.